Hello, and welcome to MyCounselor.Online. I'm your host, Brittany East, and joining me today as our featured counselor is Emily Hurst. Emily, we're really excited to jump into your article, but before we do that, can you take a second to introduce yourself for those viewers who may not know you yet?
Yeah, my name is Emily Hurst. I'm a counselor therapist here with MCO. I've been here, I think I was just talking to our boss the other. I think I've been with my counselor for like 5 years now almost. So yeah, that's I guess just a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, your article, I feel like, especially, we're coming up around the holidays, so this is probably really poignant for this time of year. It's titled Self-Care, Is It Selfish? So what inspired you to write this article?
Oh, so many things, but I think the biggest is just sitting with so many clients and just hearing that phrase over and over again. Like it's selfish to take care of myself, or like that's not allowed, or right, all these different narratives that we hear around self-care. And so it just is inspired from the work that I've done with a lot of clients of trying to undo that narrative and help slow them down to learn that it's okay to care for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like there is a demographic do you feel like this comes up more, or when you wrote your article, did you have like a pretty broad audience in mind?
A pretty broad audience in mind, but I will say, like, I feel like maybe I hear this most often from people in ministry.
Mm, that makes
Because
sense.
ministry isn't a typical 9 to 5 job, boundaries are a little bit more difficult to uphold.
Yeah.
And the narrative of like having to be there to support a lot of people can really kind of warp this sense of like, then it's not okay to slow down and take care of myself. So I think my ministry clients were the ones that kind of really sparked this, but I think it can apply to so many people.
Yeah, definitely. So, definitely in today's age, Instagram, there's a lot of like, take care of yourself, like wash your hair or like things like that. But I'd really love to hear, like, from your clinical perspective, like what is true self-care?
Yeah, I think from my clinical perspective, self-care is just slowing down and refilling your cup, right? So we are finite human beings. We don't have infinite capacity. So whether that's physical capacity or emotional and mental capacity. So for me, self-care is just slowing down and doing small things that kind of refill the cup for your capacity to then, right, feed into other people. So yeah, small things like washing your hair. I know that's a big one for my new moms. So it's like take a shower, wash your hair. Or just even going to bed 30 minutes earlier, or
Mm.
right, just doing small things. They don't have to be these huge elaborate things that just kind of feel restful and grounding to your body and your mind.
That makes sense. So, I mean, so you kind of brought this up too. Like, it is a big wrestling issue for a lot of your ministry clients. But is self care actually found in the Bible? Like, is this, I think that is, obviously MCO works with a lot of Christian people who identify as Christian. I'm just curious then, like, yeah, like, because I feel like that is probably where the sticking point probably comes. Like, well, like, did
Yeah.
Jesus self care?
Yeah, that is a huge question I get all the time. Like, is this biblical self-care?
Mm,
Because, as Christians, the thing I often hear is we're called to lead selfless lives, which is true. But kind of coming back to this idea of like we are finite human beings, we're not
yeah.
infinite. We have a cap on our capacity. And I really think it is biblical because we see it even just in the first few chapters of the Bible, right? In Genesis, we see God create the heavens and the earth, and then it says like on the seventh day he rested. And so we see the importance of Sabbath highlighted throughout the Bible. We see moments where Jesus pulls away and spends time on his own. So I think, and then we see verses where it talks about taking care of your body, and the importance of caring for our body and taking care of your mind and your soul. And so I really think self-care truly is biblical. I just think sometimes it can get really warped into different things. And so that's where this narrative of it's selfish has come from.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe you can explore a little bit more. Why do you feel like specifically Christians? I mean, 'cause I feel like, especially being a mom, I do tend to struggle with self-care, and being a Christian, I feel like that is another layer. Why do you think Christians specifically tend to struggle with the idea of self-care, or feeling like, okay, yeah, I hear you. God rested, Jesus took a moment, but like they were still really busy. So like, how do you like help them, like pull out like, okay, this like what is truly self-care and things like that?
Yeah, that's a pretty nuanced question, but I think that the biggest piece, I think the reason we struggle so much with it, it does come back to this idea of like we are called to be selfless. Right. So we just, when we study God's love and his love for us, like the call is like to be selfless and pursue and love other people abundantly. And so I think that's why we struggle with it, because we think that if we are loving ourselves, then we are taking away from loving others.
Yeah.
When in reality, loving ourselves and taking care of ourselves equips us to love others more fully. Because I mean, it's a quintessential thing of like an empty cup cannot pour into another person.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, then when our cup becomes depleted, it creates space for other things to fill it with, like resentment that we
Wow.
aren't, taking care of ourselves, or we get frustrated at our spouses or our friends for needing so much for us, when in
Mm,
reality it's just because we feel so empty.
wow.
And so I think, like, I hope that answered the question of, I think that's where it comes from, but then why I think it's so important for us to do is because it actually allows us to fulfill that call of selfish,
Selflessness.
yeah, that word. um and to love abundantly better.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. So do you feel like there is a line though? 'Cause I feel like that's what some people feel like, well, I hear, okay, self-care is like basic necessities. Have I eaten? Have I clothed? Have I showered and things like that? And then there's like okay, well, is reading a book because I want to, not because someone's asked me to, or is I want to participate in this like running program because it feels good for my body. Like, do you feel like there is a line where self-care becomes selfish?
I think, yeah, like with anything, there's a line where we can cross over it and turn it something that is healthy into something that is unhealthy. I mean, I think it varies from person to person. And I like that's where we really have to sit in with ourselves and question, like, what is my motive behind this? Like, am I becoming more like selfish in this? So it's not this like black and white, like I can be like, this is your indicator that you have crossed the line. But I definitely do think it can become selfish. But I think even those examples you gave of like slowing down and reading a book just because you want to, or joining a program, like those are all examples of attuning to your body, and like your body needs exercise. So joining that reading program is great. Or even just slowing down and allowing your mind to rest by reading a fun, relaxing book. That's actually something that I've started doing. Is like I read so many books for work to try and like keep up on all the therapy. And I
Yeah.
started hating reading. And I
Mm,
was like, I just feel so exhausted all the time. Like even this idea of reading was becoming taxing for me,
yeah.
because it wasn't actually reading that like was allowing my mind to rest. Like I was so super actively engaged. So I just started reading like really fun books, like books that like I would have read as a teenager, right, for fun. And it helps me feel so much more rested before going into my day, because I'm not already like super drained by trying to learn something, which then allows me to be present with my clients. So those things are all self-care, but yeah, we just have to be mindful of like our motives and if how we're feeling about it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of want to circle back to one of the things you like touched on. Because I appreciate that one of the things you touched on, about like if you are not taking care of yourself, how like it's just physically impossible to like pour from an empty cup.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of in combining with like people in the like missionaries tend to struggle the most because you're right, like they don't have typical 9 to 5s, boundaries are a lot harder. What like advice then do you kind of give to people specifically within like ministry to kind of start defining like this is a self-care time versus because right, like maybe spending time with God, like they feel like that, well, that's part of my job, so like this is like I'm curious like how you help them to like pull apart like self-care.
Yeah, I really typically just start with slowing down and asking, like, what is like one thing that sounds restful to you right now, and how can we make that happen? And so for people in ministry, self-care can look a little bit different sometimes, because it's not this like, well, my self-care is I'm going to turn my phone off at 5 at the end of the day and make it so like my boss can't contact me, right? They can't necessarily do that.
Yeah.
Um, but we can adjust it so like no one needs to be contacting you at 10 o'clock at night. Right? And if they do, they'll call multiple times and they'll bypass your do not disturb. So that's fine. Um, and so it's just kind of looking like within your context, what can we do? So it's Like taking a day where it's like, yeah, maybe you don't have anything and you want to go do something, like take that day and actually go do it. And if someone asks you like, hey, like I need to sit down for coffee, if it's not an emergency, do it another day. If you've scheduled this day as a day for yourself to just rest and regroup, a lot of times we think that like there's like, if I don't have coffee with this person, or right, like take this phone call immediately, that it's going to ruin everything. And that's not always true. And so just learning to kind of decipher like what is actually an emergency that needs your time right now, and what can wait until after you've done this like thing that you've decided to do for your self-care. And just kind of setting boundaries like that instead of the typical like cut off at this point in time.
No, yeah, that's helpful. And I think that's applicable. What final piece of advice would you give to people watching this then? Just the broad general audience, they're trying to, dig into self-care.
Well, I think like the most important piece of this is like our self-care should first and foremostly as Christians always be rooted in our relationship with God. So when we're looking for self-care, the first question should be like, have I spent time with him? Am I rooted in my relationship with him? So as Christians, that should be like our first avenue for self-care, is that. And then the other piece of self-care that's really important is just really learning to attune to your body and your mind, because it's going to tell you what it needs. I can't tell you how many times people will be like, I don't even know where to start. And then if I actually just slow them down a bit and be like, what sounds good to you like in this moment, they'll be like, I just would love a bath. I'm like, okay, great. Like that's where we start. And so just really learning to attune to your body, just like how we know when we're thirsty. So we take a drink of water. We know when we need to rest. We know when our mind needs, right, to read a book or to disengage and right, talk to somebody or whatnot. So the practice of attuning to yourself is so important to then learn how to care for yourself.
Nope. Well, Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today. I really appreciate your insight into self-care.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
And for everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for watching and listening. We're really happy to be able to provide you just with a little insight, some of the things you can talk about in any therapy session. So obviously just scratch the surface, but we definitely, at MCO, we really want to help people just feel at peace, feel loved, normalized. And we hope we can do that for you. If you're curious about other things that we've talked about in the past, you can look at our past videos on YouTube if you search MyCounselor.Online Christian Counseling. And we have other articles posted on Facebook and Instagram if you search Love My Counselor. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on My Counselor Online.